Welcome to the Clear the Shelf podcast with Chris and Chris, the show that meets at the intersection of education and entertainment to discuss online arbitrage, retail arbitrage, wholesale, and all facets of selling on Amazon. We'll bring you news, tactics, strategies, insights, stories, and interviews to help you grow your Amazon business. And now, here are your hosts, Chris Grant and Chris Racic. What's up, Amazon sellers, and welcome back to the Clear the Shelf podcast with myself and my pachydermatous co-host, Chris Racic. Today, we have friend of the pod and Aura Repricer co-founder Dylan Carter with us. We're going to chat about Walmart and Dylan's hot take on the newish marketplace that seems to be the jewel of many Amazon sellers' eyes. We're going to talk some new repricing features that Aura's rolled out, and of course, it would not be a podcast with Dylan if we did not go down the AI rabbit hole and how it's going to affect us as sellers in 2025. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. We spend a total of several minutes getting ready for each one of these episodes. So if you get some value from the episode, do us a solid, pound the like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment. That is the equivalent of a digital handshake. And we will keep our end of the bargain, and we'll keep coming back and making these episodes for you. All right, Dylan, how's it going, man? How's 2025 treating you so far?
It's good. It's very exciting. There's a lot of unanswered questions right now, which is kind of exciting, but also anxiety driven, as I'm sure everybody is probably feeling. I hope it's not just me, but 2025 is already feeling different. And I can't put my finger on what that is quite yet, but things are shifting, and I think that's a good thing.
I agree. We have lots of change. It is weird how much has happened already in the first 20 days. You know, we're recording this on a transition of power in the United States. We're going from one presidency to another. We're recording this on the last afternoon that Ohio State is no longer the national championship. Or the national champion of college football. And I mean, there have been fires and explosions and I mean, all kinds of crazy things in 2025 already. And I've got a feeling it's not going to stop. It's not going to slow down. And some of these things we're going to get to when we talk about AI. But before we go there, let's talk about it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's the elephant in the room. It's Walmart. Everyone and their brother who is an Amazon seller either wants to get on Walmart or is already shouting from the rooftops how much better Walmart is than Amazon. I think that Chris and I are maybe not in the same mindset as you, but pretty daggone close to it, where it's like, yes, it's another sales channel. That's fantastic. But let's slow our roll a little bit. You know, it is 1/50th the size of, I think that's right. I think it's 1/50th the size of the Amazon marketplace. It's still the Wild West, and all of us have kind of seen that. We've seen that with Amazon already. And so I guess I'm curious, you've got a bit of a contrarian view, and I want to hear about it.
Yeah, we call ourselves a tech company, not an Amazon software company. We do that. We've talked about this on the pod before, like language matters. We look at what the tech industry is doing and has done. Like, what are the patterns in history there? And anytime a new platform comes to market, you're naturally going to use unsustainable incentives. Why? Because you're not worried about profitability. You're worried about traction. Walmart's already a profitable business, so they can be unprofitable in that new market for a long period of time. Now, as time goes on, they gain that traction. What's going to happen is those will start to change, right? So it's like, if you look at a startup, a lot of startups raise money. Well, why did they raise money? Well, it's to hire, certainly, but it's also like, we're just not going to make money for a while. Eventually, that will change, and the conversation becomes, great, we need to focus on profitability now, the actual operations of the business. So as Amazon sellers in e-commerce, we don't tend to think through, pre-making money and post-making money. Like, you made a sale, you made money for the most part, right? So we're kind of in this phase where Amazon is gaining a ton of traction. And I think rightfully so. I don't think it's a bad thing, right? But the sentiment that I'm seeing online, I think will change towards the end of this year. I wrote a blog post, like 4 bold predictions that I kind of foresee happening this year. And one of those is like the sentiment on Walmart will shift. Why? Because as sellers, listen, we have really high expectations. We know we do. We're very critical. And so anything compared to the thing we're used to, if it's even remotely better, we're going to put it up on a pedestal. The problem is I don't think that's the right mental framework for how to view Walmart. If we go back historically, back when I was a seller, Amazon was the golden goose, and I think still is for the most part. Has it gotten tougher? Yes. Has it gotten tougher every year that I've been in this space for a third of my life? Yes. Right? Like even when I became a seller a decade ago, more than a decade ago, actually, at this point, sellers would talk about, oh, the good old days, it was the Wild West, you could do whatever. Right? So we're seeing history repeat itself. So we need to keep this in mind. But what would happen is you would maximize Amazon, maybe do a little eBay, and then Walmart started to kind of come in. And so some people started to do Walmart, or they would go international. And so my recommendation to sellers back then was, listen, unless you have completely maxed out the opportunity on Amazon, it's a distraction to go to any other channel because there's operational issues there. Like it's not one-to-one, right? You're going to have to do things differently. Now we're entering into a world where it's less about having a secondary channel and more having it as like a backup, like it's kind of like a little side hustle. And more so, I think Amazon sellers, you have to realize you're an e-commerce business who happens to sell on Amazon. I love when people are like, oh, I'm OA. No, you're not. You are an e-commerce retailer. How you purchase your inventory is what we use to identify ourselves in our community. But if we zoom out a little bit, right, we go upstream, we're all retailers at the end of the day. Well, what do retailers do as things shift and grow? Well, they go multi-channel. Nike doesn't just sell on Nike.com. They sell everywhere. And there's pros and cons to every platform. There always is. And right now, what we're seeing is Amazon's still going to be the best for velocity. It's hard to beat, right? But Walmart's pretty good for profit margin. Okay, that's good too. So what do you do then as a seller? Do you say, okay, well, I'm seeing a bunch of people jump over to Walmart and they seem to like it. I'm going to do the same. Okay, why would you risk, let's say you're doing $1 million a year in revenue. Why would you risk that to go to a new unknown thing based on somebody having been doing it for a few months? It's really not that long.
Hey Amazon sellers, are you tired of juggling multiple tools to manage your FBA business? Well, say goodbye to the chaos and hello to Boxum, the all-in-one software that streamlines your shipments, inventory, and profitability tracking in just a few clicks. With Boxum, you'll cut your shipment time in half, gain real-time insights into your business, and keep your inventory under control, all from one simple, intuitive dashboard. Don't waste time. Try Boxum today and take your Amazon FBA game to the next level. Check it out over at cleartheshelf.com/Boxum and start your 14-day free trial now.
And so I think we need to start taking this portfolio approach of it's not just I sell on Walmart or I sell on Amazon. I'm a retailer and I'm deciding what platforms are the best to sell on and what are the pros and cons of each one. So I don't think you should be buying inventory just for Walmart or just for Amazon. I think when you're looking at inventory, you need to be understanding, well, okay, I'm going to move, let's say 3 times the velocity over on Amazon. I'll make sure I do that. I know I'm going to take a lower margin, but on Walmart, I'm going to move 1/3 of the velocity, but I can get 20% increase in profit margin. I'm going to do both. Why? Because I'm getting the best of both worlds. And so I'm not sure if I'm being super contrarian about it, but I do notice the same pattern of when wholesale became a thing. Everybody was like, oh, I'm leaving OA and RA, I'm going straight to wholesale. And some people did really well, and a lot of people struggled. They didn't understand that it's a different skill set. And just because somebody's making money with something does not mean that it's the right decision for you. You can make money doing a lot of different things, right? I always say, no matter what the business model is, there's somebody doing $1 million a year in revenue. Guaranteed. Like, I've yet to see it. So we need to not have this it's the shiny object syndrome, right? But we're seeing it at a much larger scale than just the business model itself. Now we're seeing this for platforms. And so I think if we take a step back and view this more as like a business owner perspective, it's not a one or the other thing. Walmart's going to win, Amazon's going away. It's not going away. It's the landscape itself. What it means to be a seller is now different. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing, because if we look at the second order of Walmart really pushing, I mean, they're calling sellers to get them on the platform. They're doing a ton. They're hosting events. They're listening to feedback. They're going to move fast. That creates a competitive landscape for Amazon, right? I think we've talked previously. I know I've talked about this online. Like, Amazon has been under a lot of regulatory pressure. And I think it's very easy for sellers to just say, well, Amazon hates us. I don't think that's the case, right? Like, these are people at the end of the day, they want to make money too. But with that regulatory pressure that comes in, it's going to force them to make certain decisions. And that doesn't necessarily lead to good outcomes for sellers. But now we're entering into a world where they're having to pause and say, okay, I don't think we can do that now. Like, we're going to have to push back on certain things or get more creative. I mean, look at them not increasing fees this year. I mean, that alone should tell you what they're thinking. And so I think, again, if you take a step back and you view yourself as a retailer or a seller, just generally speaking, you now have two platforms that are going to compete for your business. That is a fantastic thing. But what you don't want to do is jump to the brand new one and leave the one that's been crushing it forever, right? And so that's kind of my thought process on the whole Walmart situation.
Let me push back a little bit, just because I know that this is what a seller would say. Well, sure, they're not increasing fees this year, and they've said that, but there's a sneaky fee increase, and that is the reduction in reimbursements for inventory that gets damaged or lost at warehouses. What's your answer to when someone pushes back with that?
I think it's somewhat a null point, because the perspective on that pushback is that, well, Walmart's not doing that, therefore Amazon doing that is bad. Walmart will begin to do that at some point. Remember that whole like shifting to profitability? That's going to happen. It's going to happen. Short term, sure, absolutely. But again, it is telling. It's not that they're going to make things perfect, but it is showing that they're trying, and that's the important part. If Amazon is refocusing on their sellers, that's a good thing, because they're going to find things. They're going to make changes. They're going to listen more. All that good stuff. So it's not going to be, short term. I think it's going to be kind of crazy, to be honest. I think it's going to be really chaotic in the short term, because Amazon trying to figure out, okay, Walmart's serious now. They're actually gaining traction. What do we need to do? Walmart's trying to catch up with Amazon, because there's a lot there. We're starting to support Walmart. We're building out Walmart repricing, like true native repricing right now for Walmart. And there's just a lot of data that's not there. And so, we have, as developers, have to work with their development team to say, hey, here are things that sellers expect in the data that expect to work. If that makes sense for your platform, awesome. If not, let us know. So there's a lot happening. You're going to have things like this. And listen, Amazon's so massive. I imagine there are different teams running these different fees and stuff like that. It's not just like 10 people in a room that's like, you know what, we're not going to do that one, but we're going to raise this one up. It's probably a bunch of different teams. Even with the new packaging rule that recently came out with the sharp objects, again, Walmart's probably not going to do that for a while. Why? Because they're not under as much regulatory pressure. So again, Amazon's going to have to make certain decisions to protect them. Whereas Walmart's kind of in this, let's gain traction, just figure things out as we go. And then we'll deal with those stuff as we come under regulatory pressure. Also, like, I'm not sure if Walmart has unions in the way that Amazon does, but Amazon has unions, and that creates its own complexity as well in terms of what can and can't get done. So again, you really have to understand, I think, how complex these platforms are. We like to think, oh, it's just Amazon. No. It's hundreds of thousands of people working in different focused areas of that business. Sometimes they talk to one another, sometimes they don't. So I think, in the short term, you're going to have, you go forward a step, you go back 2 steps, and maybe that shifts. It's hard to know exactly how it's going to go, but I'm kind of looking for the sentiment, the signals as to how they could be thinking, because we don't know unless they explicitly tell us.
Mm-hmm. I made a joke recently about what seemed like a silly change, and it seemed like, someone was coming up on a quarterly review, and something just needed to get shipped, so he makes sure he makes his 3% raise.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that happens, a fair amount.
Sure.
And I think you make a great point about the regulatory pressure. Whoever's finger got chopped off at an Amazon warehouse because of, a knife, Amazon knows that OSHA has to come in, and
Yeah.
and the National Labor Relations Board, and whoever else oversees that kind of stuff. And Walmart's, they're not under the microscope yet.
Yep.
And
Not yet.
so not yet. Exactly. Now, the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is, see, I'm not really surprised at all by your viewpoint. And in my opinion is this is a couple of things. One, we've seen this over and over and over again. Amazon did this to eBay. Amazon was calling eBay sellers saying, "Hey, you want to come over to our platform? It's going to be
Yes.
so much better. It's going to be awesome." And we saw the same thing there. Now Walmart is doing it. And I don't know about you, but when I take a step back, I see like the network effect in
Mm.
perfect, it's like I'm seeing the Matrix. You've seen it with Google.
Yep.
They made sure that everyone got traffic really easily, and that made everybody want to create content. And what is Web 2.0 essentially.
Yep.
You saw it with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Everyone said, "Hey, come over here. It's going to be better. You're gonna get likes. You're gonna get views. You're gonna be able to build an audience." And then that all starts to go away as the platforms get what they want. And e-commerce platforms don't seem any different. Why is that so difficult for the seller to see?
It's not their industry. Is my go-to answer on that. And this is why, and I know you've heard me say this multiple times, you have got to read and study things outside of your industry. It doesn't have to be completely agnostic to your industry. It could just be, okay, well, I sell on Amazon. That's e-commerce and tech. Okay, let me go see and learn about tech and how just tech operates. And I don't mean like coding. I mean like literally, how do those tech businesses operate? There's a pretty consistent playbook there for these massive companies. Same thing for e-commerce, right? And so if you go and understand those patterns, you can kind of start to see the history of it, and then it starts to make a ton of sense. But honestly, it's the same thing that I did with wholesale, right? Everybody was like, "Oh, you have to learn wholesale." You don't learn wholesale. There's not a skill called wholesale. The skill to get good at getting wholesale accounts, which is the outcome you want, is sales. So when you take a step back and say, generally, what am I doing? Okay, well, I'm cold calling. Okay, well, what subject is cold calling? Well, that's sales. Let me go learn sales. Okay, now this makes sense, and I'm good at it. It's the same concept. This is why I think being too entrenched in the Amazon community could be a bad thing. I think the community is fantastic, like everybody leaning on one another, but it does require you to step out of it from time to time to see the more macro, larger picture. So when everybody's getting upset with Amazon, I'm not really upset. I'm like, this is exactly what I would expect to happen. Like, this makes total sense. Walmart coming up, doing what they're doing at the phase they're at makes total sense. Yeah, and you have to keep in mind too, companies, the life cycle of a company over the ages of America has gone down, right? Because you have you have less friction in starting businesses than ever before. So Kodak, around forever in the chemicals business, is how they viewed it. Instagram comes along, destroys their business pretty much overnight. The rate at which innovation is occurring is incredibly fast because you can move faster. You don't need mainframes and all this other stuff. Like, you can take a team of 10 engineers that are amazing and be like, let's go start this. And you go do that. So it's not surprising that we're seeing a shift in our industry. I think we'll see more of them. I don't know. If you look at social media platforms, their whole goal is network effects, to your point. How fast have we gone through social media applications, right? Facebook or MySpace, kind of the first one for the most part that was mainstream. Facebook takes it over. Instagram comes out. Twitter comes out. And like, yeah, everybody kind of finds what they prefer. Like I'm more of a Twitter guy than an Instagram guy, but then TikTok comes over and takes over Instagram. But these things happen fast, right? And you mentioned that it's only the 20th of the new year, but it already feels like 3 months. It's because the rate of innovation is happening so rapidly right now. And I think this kind of will need to force regulations to shift as well. At least that's what I'm hoping for in this new year. But yeah, I think it's important as a seller to zoom out sometimes and just think about, because I mean, listen, at the end of the day, we all have what's called platform risk. It's a big deal. Platform risk basically states that if your business solely operates on one platform and that platform has control of whether you work with them or not, you have platform risk. So if you're looking at tech companies that, or here's a good example. Let's say I started a company and we build applications for Shopify and we're doing a ton of money and that's great, but we only do it for Shopify. Shopify at any moment could say, we don't like you, we're turning off your API access. That's platform risk. So when you go to sell that business, you get a ding on your valuation because like, we don't know, like that's a risk. Well, sellers have that too. And so
thank you for listening to the Clear the Shelf podcast. My magnanimous co-host Chris Racic has put together a gift for you for being a listener. It's called the Monthly Goal Tracking Spreadsheet, and it's free. The spreadsheet will help you break down and track how much you've purchased, which should be a leading indicator of how much you will sell, and then you'll be able to track how much you've sold as well as your estimated monthly profit on a daily basis. This will all feed into the daily averages so you can ensure that you're on track to meet your goals each and every month. Grab it for free today over at cleartheshelf.com/goal-tracking. Thanks again for being a listener. Now back to the show.
By understanding that alone, it helps you understand, okay, Walmart is a good thing to at least have in my back pocket. That's a good thing. And where is that platform risk at right now, right? Is it higher or is it lower? Where is it going to trend towards? And that's why I like looking at those signals. Is it that the platform risk is going to get higher for the average seller, or is it going to get lower or stay where it's at? I'm looking for signals to kind of point in what direction we're going to go there. And it's not always clear. You can definitely get it wrong. You still, no matter what, have platform risk. But again, zooming out will help you start to see those things and understand them. And then by having that context, you make different decisions. You start to understand, okay, here's a great thing. It breaks my heart to have a seller who got a Section 3. They come to us and say, hey, I need to pause repricing. I got a Section 3. I got deactivated. Say, okay. And in the conversation, it comes out that if they can't get it repealed in 2 weeks, they're out of business because they didn't build up enough cash as safety, right? So when you're starting a business, you spend it all because you got nothing to lose. You're trying to build something of value, but then you have something of value, an actual asset, and now you're not doing anything to protect it. Well, if you see the rise of Section 3s coming up, and then you pay attention and say, okay, well, most people seem to repeal these within 30 days. Okay, I'm going to make sure I have at least 30 days of cash in the bank so I can pay my bills, pay myself, whatever I need to do. And then it's an emergency fund. If it happens, I'm prepared. If it doesn't, I still got the cash and we're good here. If Amazon comes out and says Section 3s are done, we're never doing them again, great, go spend the money, go buy more inventory. But when you're looking through that lens of risk, you need to understand, where do I have risk and how do I mitigate that risk in case it were to happen? And now all of a sudden, these deactivations, still annoying, are not detrimental to the business. It's not well, if I get hit, I'm done, I'm going to Walmart. Don't have that mindset. You should be protecting the asset you've built. And you should be saying, okay, well, I see the rise here. I'm going to make sure from a cash perspective, I'm good. I'm going to keep growing here because that's what's paying the bills. I'm going to start to look at Walmart and then start to take this portfolio approach, understanding the pros and cons of each one. And then as the market is shifting, I can react and be very flexible and adaptive with it.
Yeah. I think part of this is a lot of this is being sold as a system, or sold as a side hustle, right. And people don't realize that you're building a business. It's an actual business.
Yes.
And Chris and I have said it before, like, unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to realize they're not cut out for something like this, because it is a business. It's not putting together IKEA furniture. It's not, slot A, tab A into slot B, it doesn't work like that. So
it's hard. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what business you're in, it is hard. I mean, there are months where you just don't want to do it anymore because you're so burnt out and you're over it. But if this is the only thing you want to do with your life, then you're like, all right, this sucks, but like, let's keep going. Let's get through it. So yeah, I think it does take a little mindset shift of like, what are you building here? And what's the point of it all? Because I think if you come to Amazon saying, I just want to make more money, I think that's incredibly short-sighted and it will hurt you more than anything else. We're all here to make money. We're all capitalists, but there has to be a larger why that is driving you through the pain that is building a business or a company. Because I promise you, every single business is like, as Elon Musk says, chewing on glass. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't, from personal experience, from everyone I've known, I've never really seen a rebound relationship work out, which is kind of what all these sellers move into Walmart because they're mad at Amazon. I mean, it's a rebound relationship, you know, and it doesn't end well. I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, remember when do you remember? I wonder how many people remember that this is Walmart. You know, like, what was your opinion of Walmart before you became an Amazon seller? Because it wasn't, most people, it wasn't positive, right? Like when they were proliferating with physical stores, you know, people hated Walmart because they were putting mom and pop shops out of business. Yeah, and then once they got established, you heard horror stories of these truck drivers who had these really tight windows to deliver, and Walmart would send them away if they weren't there on time. So the truckers hated them. Local suppliers hated them because they have so much leverage, and you know, they could just bend you to their own will, and they were losing money because of that. People hated Walmart that way. The employees. When's the last time you talked to an employee that knew what the hell was going on in Walmart?
Right.
You know, like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, like once the rebound relationship kind of reveals itself, people are gonna be like, oh yeah, it's Walmart. I remember.
Yeah, you got to keep this all on keel, right? Like keep it all, you know, there's Facebook groups of, you know, people of Walmart and all these different things like, you know, so I agree. But at the same time, to, you know, put one vote towards Walmart, they were one of the first companies to have their own satellites for fast data syncs. So like they have been technically advantaged in the retail world, at least from an early stage. I'm not sure where they're at now. I imagine they're still pretty good. But yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind, like, I don't think you're ever going to find a platform that you're just like, everything's perfect. I don't think it exists.
Right.
And that's okay. I think we need to move past the whole, like, well, fees went up, I'm annoyed. Okay, I get it. I do. But they happen every year. So like, why is your expectation any different? Well, except for this year, of course. But like, why even waste any time on it? Move and adapt, move and adapt, move and adapt. And that's all it is, right? And to your point about like it being sold as a system, yeah, a lot of people want to like freeze it in its current stage and be like, this is how you do it. Yeah, that's fine. I learned your system. I don't know any of the foundations of business. So the moment something shifts, my system breaks and I can't fix it. That doesn't leave you in a good spot. And there's a few books I think everybody should read that help with a lot of this stuff. But at the end of the day, you do have to understand you're building a business here, and that comes with some stuff. And I think that's good. You know, like I don't want to be a negative Nancy on it. Like it's good, but you got to understand what game you're playing first and foremost.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned you wrote a blog post about predictions. So I want to pose this to you and putting you on the spot. And so I apologize in advance. Say the wave of Section 3s ends, right?
Yeah.
And Amazon has verified essentially to their own satisfaction their third-party seller supply chains, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Walmart keeps going, right? And they're still, everything's rosy over there, and they're still drawing a bunch of stuff. They're taking advantage of the disgruntled Amazon sellers, which is, you know, it's smart. At what point does Walmart become so big that Amazon has to see them as a true threat so much, and a true threat so that they actually have to now cater to their own third-party sellers? What happens when the scale balances a little bit? What does that look like from an Amazon perspective? And what number or what level would Walmart have to get to reach that stage?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer without being inside of it, but I imagine they're looking at the attrition rate of sellers leaving. I was reading the marketplace pulse thing, blog post talking about 1 million sellers got started last year. Great. Mm-hmm. No, it's a very small percentage that actually got a sale and did anything, right? So it's like it's a vanity number to a certain degree, right? So that attrition, I don't think is a big deal. Looking at the attrition rate of people who, let's say, have done at least 10,000 a month in sales for 3 months consecutively and then left, because that's an actual business. At that point, that's what I would be looking at, and I would be looking at that rate and seeing if it's increasing. Because this is a side hustle strong business, you naturally have higher attrition rates. Like people just try it out, they get a few sales and then they leave. Totally fine. But I would be looking at actual businesses and saying, okay, well, how many are leaving? Because they're probably not, basically like the probability of them shutting down and not selling period is much lower than them going to a different platform. And that's what I would be looking at. I don't know. It's hard to say. I personally, I think they're already starting to watch Walmart. I think they are.
Yeah.
I think they know what's happening with Section 3s. They see it. They're in the communities. They see the forum posts, all that stuff. They know what's up. They're not blind. But what number forces them to basically upheave everything? I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I imagine you don't really care necessarily about the number of sellers. You care about the inventory. They created third-party sellers to syndicate inventory without them having to purchase or go to large brands. It's a decentralized way of basically fulfilling the other side of the marketplace is what they're doing, right? So if that starts to get hit where searches are coming up empty, listings are going out of stock, that I think alone would change everything for them.
Yeah.
Basically like their SKU coverage is kind of what I would think. Exactly. Because if us three are both, or if all three of us are selling on the same listing equally, and then two of us jump off, but one of us stays and basically buys more inventory, did their inventory really change? No. So like, I don't think they really care about the number of sellers. They care about that coverage.
So how do they address that? Do you think, would they actually lower fees in categories where their offerings are scarce? Like what would Amazon, imagine a world where Amazon actually has to entice sellers back onto the platform?
Yeah. I mean, I imagine fees would be the first place to go to, because that's what everybody talks about. My fear is that there's not enough margin in the fees to be able to pull it back. I don't know that. You get to a certain point where the operational cost of the operation is so high that the fees have to rise to keep their margin. I don't know what their margin is on fees specifically. But my fear would be that there's not enough margin to be able to pull back unless they changed operations, which I think, I mean, listen, Amazon isn't talked a lot about in the AI space, but they are doing a lot and they are partnering up. They funded Anthropic, who has Claude. So I think they are thinking through these things. And a lot of the fees outside of the actual hand holding of inventory could be replaced with AI, and that would vastly lower the cost. Now, you still have robotics coming in. Robotics are getting better and somewhat cheaper over time, so that could help. So my optimist perspective on it is robotics get so good and so cheap that fees go down. AI gets implemented in a way that's effective and efficient, so fees go down. What really happens though is fees tend to not go down. They tend to just have a larger margin. You make more money. But if you've been able to increase your margin dramatically, and now you have this external pressure to lower fees, now you at least can. So I hope that they get into a position where they can do it if they can't already. It's the hard part with Amazon, man. It's so complicated. Right. It's hard to know.
You talk about AI and robots and things like that. Do you foresee eventually that a number of employees at Amazon warehouses are replaced by Optimus or something similar? I can't think of the other robot company they just deployed into like AT&T or some Figure. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. They just deployed into BMW. I do foresee that. I do. If you look at some of the most recent posts on Amazon fulfillment centers, what you have, they shifted it, right? Historically, you had product that was static, so it stayed in one area, and then a human would go and grab it and move it. And so people started to make robots that would say, okay, you put it on me, I'll move it, and then another robot will come to you. Not as efficient. So they flipped it and said, okay, a human won't move within this 2 feet block. You got a cell, so like a computer that's telling you what to do, and then you have robots bringing the inventory to you, so you can package it in real time, so that there's no human movement. Because in lean manufacturing, human movement is a big waste. Mm-hmm. So they made that shift. Okay, so now we have 2 components that the human's doing. They're doing something with intelligence, so they're reading what's happening, they're converting that into next actions, and they're reaching and grabbing inventory, and then I'm not sure if in that cell they're prepping it or not. So the intelligence part AI can handle pretty well, but you need it connected to the actual grabbing. So that's when you have vision and you have robotics come in. So, I mean, if we just break down those as technologies, I don't think we're incredibly far off from being able to do that today. Like that's not that hard to do vision recognition on products, tell a robot, hey, grab that. We're pretty much there. So I don't even think necessarily that they need full humanoid robotics to pull that off. But again, this is where unions come into play. Unions, and we saw this with the big strike in New York. The big discrepancy was not necessarily the increase in pay. It was a clause that basically said you're not allowed to automate anything. Okay, so let's take jobs out of it for a moment, because I know that's a heated problem by itself and subject. If we just look at it from a cost benefit perspective, if we could completely automate ports using robotics and AI, which we could do majority of that now. We still have humans managing workflows, but still we could do that today. The cost of importing things and processing them would dramatically go down. I think we could also do that in a warehouse. I really don't have any doubts we could do that.
Now you got me curious. So I'm just gonna go down this rabbit hole. Okay. I know that if we talk as a country, our competitors, China, those kind of places, they are using AI, they are using automation, yes, robotics in places like ports.
Yes.
How far behind do we have to fall before we get over this? I don't know, this Luddite view of using automation, robotics, AI in places like ports, despite the job losses. And let me say that I don't want to see anybody lose their job before anybody comes in the comments and yells at us. I don't want to see that. Historically, the adoption of new technologies does not displace jobs entirely. It shifts jobs for the most part. Right. So, I want to be empathetic to those people who may have a skill set that maybe they have a difficulty getting another job. However, that is unlikely to happen en masse. But I'm curious, how far behind do we have to fall before we say, okay, we've got to do something different if we want to keep up?
It's just a decision. We're already there. So right now, this got me curious when the strike first got mentioned last year, and a lot of tech people on Twitter were like, "Yeah, why don't we just go start a competing port and just fully automate it?" And please check me on this, but as far as I understand it, you basically cannot have a port that doesn't have a union, like legally. So there's a regulation issue where it won't happen unless the regulation itself is changed. So it's just a decision to change it is what it comes down to. But the ramifications of that decision is complicated. It does affect humans. And so I understand why it should be considered deeply and thought through, but that's all it comes down to. It's just a decision.
I'm not trying to get you canceled here, but I'm going to ask this question because I'm curious. All right. Have unions played their role in the economy, and what do you think the next version of the union should be?
I think if you're in a union, you're pro-union. If you're outside of a union, you're anti-union. That's been my perspective on it. I personally think unions are antiquated and a band-aid to solve larger problems. If you have a union that's coming together that is set to protect wages and things of that nature, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you didn't have as much competition for your job, as in like, okay, if you're not going to treat me well, I'll go over here. They'll pay me better. So if you don't have firms basically competing for you, then I understand why they exist, right? If you're in a small town, 1800s, 1900s, whatever, and there's one factory, they can do whatever they want. And where are you going to go? You got to move towns, move your whole family. You're not going to do it. So unions come together to basically protect the working people. Nothing wrong with that. I think in a world that is far more competitive from a firm perspective, you don't necessarily need that, because if you have a port that's unionized, or let's take unions out for a moment. You have a port, you're not paying your people well enough, you're not treating them well enough, there's not enough safety. I create a competing port and I say, well, that's what you guys care about. Okay, cool. We're going to have safety. I'm going to pay 20% above. We can make that work. Where are you going? You're coming to me all day. So it does feel antiquated to me. Granted, I don't know the subtle nuances of unions. I've never dove deep into that subject, but like, that's just my general kind of thesis on that. I don't know. Like, in terms of an alternative, I think the alternative is a free market, to be honest, right? It's literally like, if we bring it back home for a second, if I have a VA that's sourcing for me and I'm not paying them enough and treating them like crap, but they can go to one of you guys and they'll get paid more and get treated great, they're going to probably do that. So I would hesitate to say, well, that person should build it. My team should build a union and stuff like no, like the business is going to struggle as a secondary result of the people leaving.
Mm-hmm. And we've come a long way from company towns.
Yes, 1,000%.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I know we got a little off track, so I'm gonna try to steer the ship back a little bit. You mentioned something that I thought was interesting. You mentioned that, if I want to build a wholesale business, I really need to learn about sales. I need to learn about cold calling, things like that. I like the way that Scott Adams, who created Dilbert, talks about it. He talks about, I was an okay cartoonist. I was an okay business person, and I have an okay sense of humor. But then I took all those things and I combined them, and now he's kind of this category of one. And so I'm curious. Listen, I am of the mindset, whether you're retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, or wholesale, it is arbitrage. You are doing retail. So what do you think some of the hard skills, and just one or two hard skills and soft skills outside of the Amazon space, sellers should learn to be better business people?
I think the first one that applies to everything is relationships, right? Like if you're doing RA, like you need to be building relationships with store managers. If you're doing wholesale, that's pure relationships. Even doing OA, like having relationships with people you can work together. I mean, I love seeing these younger sellers where they'll I'm calling it a pod. They'll get together on Zoom, 3 of them. They'll say, you go source Target, you go source Vitacost, whatever it is. And then whatever you find that's profitable that you're buying, you tell me, I'll replicate it and I'll do the same for you. And so now we've scaled ourselves in terms of time really, really, really fast. That's pretty cool. But those are relationships. You have to be able to trust these people that, we're going to compete in a healthy way together and like blah, blah, blah. I think that's the first one. The second one is more general, but like pattern recognition. Like what's happening? like how many times have you sat down to analyze all your sales data to say, well, what works well? Because there's a lot of things that I used to buy that at the surface looked great. I could scale forever. But when it came to the sales aspect, it actually struggled quite a lot. And so I had to pause myself and say, okay, I know you want to go buy all that because it looks great, but we're not going to buy it. And here's the reason. Well, it took me having to go back through my data to say, okay, well, what categories do I really do well with? What stores, doing 80-20 on things, right? If you're doing RA, what's the 20% of stores you go to that generate 80% of your business? Can you go deeper into those? Do you not have a store relationship? Maybe you should get one. Now you can go deeper into it. Like all that kind of stuff starts to play together because and this is something I really personally struggle with a lot, is like, I really struggle using data to make decisions. Like I have to like prime myself to do it and be like, you have to go look, because I want to use my intuition and experience to be like, well, it's probably this, but I have ADD, and like that doesn't mean that I'm correct. I'm neurodivergent. Sometimes I'm correct, not all the time, but you have to kind of train yourself to say, well, go find the answers to the questions you have. And then once you have the answers, what does that mean that I need to do? So instead of just doing the same thing over and over again, which again, I tend to find myself doing sometimes, I have to pause and like go back into the data and be like, all right, just because I'm used to doing it this way doesn't mean that that's how things need to continue. I actually need to pause and say, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to do more of this, or maybe I need to add this other thing. Those would be the biggest two generalized things that it doesn't matter the business model.
Perfect.
Well, that rings true. Like, because if you look at the data, you might have to get out of your comfort zone, or you might have to adapt, which is, it harkens back to, the conversation that we had about Amazon versus Walmart, and not being, not take a step back and kind of take it from a 50,000 foot level. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That I'm wounded with that statement.
Don't worry. Me too. Don't worry. I say these things because these are things I struggle with a lot as well. So I'm definitely not perfect at it either.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about repricing. You guys just released a new feature that, in my opinion, incredibly useful. The ability to automatically change the repricing rules for aged inventory. So first question is, what made you guys implement that change?
This is something we've wanted for a long time. And going back to the comment about pattern recognition, when we look at sellers and what they do, and for context, we're always looking for ways to help you automate the software, right? Like I don't like using software when it's like, well, now I just created more tasks for you, or I'm doing these tasks for you, but I'm creating these other set of tasks that you now have to do. So like, I didn't really get much time back. So repricing as a whole, saves you a ton of time, right? We're repricing 24/7, all that cool stuff, but there's still work to be done in your account. And, when we first launched workflows, it was our attempt at starting to solve this problem, right? Because we were big fans of Zapier, Make.com, stuff like that, right? If I do the same thing every single time, let me just put it into the software and you do it for me. So the first thing we did is we said, okay, well, what's the first most impactful thing that everybody has to do? Well, for repricing in Aura, you need three things. You got to have a strategy assigned. We need your cost, or a min price. We mainly need the min price, but we recommend that you automatically calculate that using the cost. And we need repricing on. Okay, so if we have integrations, we're getting your costs, your strategy is going to auto assign and calculate your min price. That means there's two things that are left over: assigning that strategy and enabling repricing. So the workflow initially came out, which was whenever a new listing comes in, assign a strategy and then toggle on repricing. So now you don't have to do this whole gymnastics of, okay, it got shipped, it got checked in. Let me go see if it's available in Aura. Okay, now it is. Let me go make those changes, blah, blah, blah. That's just gone. All that's gone. Like as much more time as I can create for you to spend buying inventory, that's what I want to do. So we started to think recently, after the rebuild, of like, okay, well, what's some other stuff? Like, let's take a step back and think, what's the frameworks? Because we do a lot of this kind of stuff of like teaching and whatnot. And we developed a framework that I think helps a lot of sellers. And that framework is relatively simple. Every seller goes through the same life cycle for every single listing they're on. And that life cycle is basically, you start conservative. So when you first come into stock, you care more about profitability than anything else. As time goes on, we go deeper into the life cycle. What happens is now we want to move the inventory faster. We want to avoid long-term storage fees. We want our capital back. And so you become more aggressive, right? So up here, profitability; down here, sales velocity, less profitability. So that's the model we think in. So then we started to say, okay, well, how do you transition? What does that transition look like? Well, when we came out with Maven, it handles that first phase incredibly well, but it's not going to liquidate you. It's not that aggressive. It's not designed to do that. So we said, okay, well, what if we could create 3 strategies that generally work for everyone within all these phases? And so we put together a help doc that described this. It's help.goer.com, 3 core strategies. And it That's exactly what it does. It says, okay, well, strategy 1 is Maven. Why? Because that's going to help you maximize your profitability without negating sales velocity. Then we go to phase 2, which is we're going to target the buy box. We are going to become a little bit more aggressive. So we're still trying to make a decent amount of money in phase 2, but we're not trying to maximize it in that regard. We're trying to say we want a little bit more sales velocity. And then phase 3, the last phase, is liquidation. We say we want to go to 0% ROI if we have to. We just want our capital back. So we started to teach this and see good results with it. And then we said, well, that's all fine and dandy, but a user still has to jump in at whatever frequency they want. And I think when we talk with you, Chris, you're like once a week, maybe. I just like scan through everything and then like manually change where it goes. So the moment I hear that, I say, okay, well, you already have the process in your brain. Why don't we just take that process in your brain, and instead of you having to deploy that process whenever you want, which, let's face it, you don't want to do daily, what if we could make it that way? And so we added age of inventory as essentially a filter block. And so the way this works, you say, okay, for whatever schedule, once an hour, once every 3 hours, once a week, whatever makes sense for you. Basically go through and check the highest age of inventory for my products. And then depending on that, assign the correct strategy depending on where we're at in the life cycle. And so what's cool is the way we built this, it's not super complicated to do, but you want to go backwards too, right? You don't want to just become aggressive, because let's say I shipped in 30 units 92 days ago, and that yesterday I shipped in 2. Well, I don't really want to liquidate the 2, right? But I do want to start to liquidate the 30. So what it will do is it will check the highest, the way we recommend you build it. So it will only go to the highest age of inventory. And let's say you run this once an hour. Great. If in the next hour you had one that you wanted to liquidate and it sold, and now we go back, and it should be on Maven now. It just goes back to Maven. And so now what we've done is we've taken this idea of automation and said, okay, the first step here, integrations, get your costs in there. That's awesome. That's easy. Point and click. Number 2, let's go ahead and start to auto assign and handle new listings as they're coming through, so they're not waiting on you, as real time as we can get it. And then phase 3 is how do we handle the entire life cycle of those listings for each listing automatically for you. And you decide if you want to liquidate at 90 plus, go for it. If you want to do it at 60 days plus, go for it. And it doesn't have to be those 3 strategies. It could be whatever you want that works for you. You could only have 2. You could say my main and I liquidate. Great. When do you liquidate? When it's older than 31 days. Great. Create it. Done. So we built this in such a way that it's not super complicated to create, but it's also flexible. So we're not saying, hey, you have to do it this way. What we like to do is learn from our users, find those patterns, turn those into frameworks and say, okay, well, here's what tends to work. Here's a good starting point. So if you come in and you're like, I have no idea what I want to do, we already got 3 strategies for you, 2 workflows that are going to automate everything. You're pretty much good. But if you want to get in there and tweak it, you can tweak it exactly how you want. So I'm like really pumped for this. It works incredibly well, and it's fast, which is crazy.
Yeah. And every hour is insane to me.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You know, if you're doing it once a week manually yourself, you might miss a few SKUs. I get it. You might have a lot. But how many times could you have changed your strategy for the better if you do it even once a day? But yeah, you can set this to once an hour, once every 3 hours. You can have it happen once in the future. It's totally up to you.
Now, what if a user's life cycles are different? You know, some people have
Totally fine.
really fast movers. Other people have stuff that they don't want to liquidate. They're okay with selling just a few on a slower velocity. Yeah. Are you able to kind of segregate your inventory?
You can. Yeah, you can. So there's a few ways you can do this. Because age of inventory is a filter block, that means that you're able to add more filters ahead of it, right? So you might say, there's 2 ways you can do it based on the SKU. So you might say, hey, if the SKU contains Walmart, I don't want to do that. Do something different. Fine. Or you can use strategies, right? So you might say, okay, all my long lasting stuff that I'm willing to hold longer, I don't want to do that on. So I'm going to put them on strategy X. So what you do is you say, okay, well, filter is not strategy X, and then do those things. And so that's what's cool about building this into workflows is you're able to get in the nitty gritty and say, well, sometimes I want to, sometimes I don't. Totally fine. And the way we do this is we say the condition's pretty straightforward. How many units or percentage of units, mainly because Chris brought up percentage of units, you could do percentages as well, is greater than, less than, or equal to, and then those age of inventory buckets. So it's really flexible. The example I just gave you is like a best practice that's going to work out the box, but there's a lot in the nitty gritty that you can tweak. So if you're like, Dylan's saying, okay, if I have more than one unit above 90 days, liquidate. That's kind of the recommendation there. But I like percentages. So if more than 20% of my inventory is greater than 90 days, that's when I want to do it. Great, do that. So super flexible.
We talked about that, to be quite honest.
Yeah. We were on the fence about percentage, but then we talked with Chris about it. He's like, no, that'd be nice. I was like, all right, we'll add it.
So, seems like you're always cooking something up, which which we appreciate. Anything else coming up? Any other features that are in the modeling phase?
Yeah, so we are heavily working on Walmart repricing right now, diving deep into all that data. So that's a big focus moving forward. And then Aura is going to get a nice little refresh, which is going to be good from a design perspective. So that's going to be helpful. It's going to help us work in this new world that kind of we're building. Some stuff I can't talk about, but these changes will help us with some of the bigger stuff that we're working on.
Nice. I'm curious. We're moving into a new year. What do you think is? I guess, are there any first principles that need to be rethought when it comes to repricing in 2025?
I think we kind of already did this in 2024. In Maven is what helped us do that. Maven was our first principles approach to this. If Amazon gave us how things worked, I would probably say probably would be the case, but they don't. And so, yeah, that'd be great. My job would be easier. So the first principles approach we took with Maven was we don't always know what's going to happen and what's going to be weighted or unweighted or whatnot. And in what situations. And so instead we said, well, what if we could learn that and then use that as information and as data for updating your pricing? So we kind of took this more flexible approach, kind of the emergency fund approach, right? Which is like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can figure it out as we're going. And then as things are changing, I can react to that. So I think that's the biggest one. Outside of that is that life cycle. I think sellers need to think a little bit more strategically about how they manage their inventory through that life cycle. And there's no right or wrong answer. I think it really just depends on the business and the business owner. But I think it is good for you to outline, when do I liquidate and why do I liquidate? In what cases do I not do that? You're basically writing your own algorithm for how you manage your listings throughout their life cycle. And if you have that, now you can basically throw that into workflows and have it do it for you. So I think a more systems approach makes a lot of sense here. I've historically told sellers, you don't really need to be optimizing every single listing day by day. I think you're getting too into the weeds, and what you're not doing is building a system that's going to manage it the way you want. Now with the new age of inventory workflow will do that for you. But you really have to, again, the theme of this conversation is take a step back and really think through, well, how do I manage things generally speaking? There's always going to be, let's call it a 10% exception rule, where it's just a weird case and we have to create custom strategies for that. That's fine. But you really want to think in those buckets. And if you think in those buckets, it's going to help you say, okay, well, now I can shift my mindset from having to manage all that, all the listing administration work. And now I can refocus on buying inventory. Because the way the ideal world I want us to be in is you just focus on buying and shipping in inventory, and Aura handles everything outside of that. That's where I want us to get to. So I don't think there's any like technical first principles quite yet. It's 20 days in. For all I know, Amazon has something scheduled that is going to change everything. If that happens, I'll let you guys know.
Perfect. In the past, we've talked about I mean, we've talked a ton about AI. We've already hit on AI multiple times in this conversation, but in past shows, we've talked about AI agents. And just yesterday, I think I saw that Axios reported that OpenAI plans to announce AI super agents that'll be capable of performing tasks at PhD levels. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this? And what does this do to the timeline of Amazon sellers implementing these AI agents? And how could they do it easily?
Oh, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
Okay, so let's first break this down. OpenAI has what they call the 5 levels of AI. So level 1, chatbots. Level 2, human reasoners. Level 3, agents. Level 4 is innovators, and level 5 is organizations. We have reached level 2, so human level reasoners with 4.0 and 01. The next big push is agents. You hear a lot right now about this agent and that agent. We do not yet have agents. What people are doing is they're taking the concept of automation like Zapier.com and they're putting agents inside of it. So I position this as rigid versus non-rigid automation. Rigid automation is Zapier.com. If one thing is wrong, the whole thing breaks. Non-rigid automation uses large language models, so AI inside of it, that can make some different decisions itself. People call those agents. I don't. I think that's very different. When OpenAI says they have agents, what they're saying is the model itself can do it, not somebody building with a model. So I'm very bullish on this. Because there's so much hype, I'm trying to stifle myself a little bit and not get too excited. I think when level 4 and level 5 are really cool stuff, like organizations, level 5. Imagine your entire business being ran by AIs, the whole thing. That's what they're talking about. That's so crazy. That's Jarvis level. That's past Jarvis, right? Level 3 is the thing I think will fundamentally change our society. Level 2 was really cool, right? We can go back and forth, have great conversations, but it can't do anything for me. Like, I hate to say anything because yes, it could do text generation, image generation, all that stuff, but it's not completing a task. If I say I want a blog post and here's the process, you go off and do it and I don't care. Can't do that. That's where agents come in. So in terms of getting that, I do think we will get that this year, probably earlier this year. We're seeing inklings of this coming out. OpenAI released tasks in 4.0. But again, it's not completing necessarily. It's just doing the same thing it could do there with you not having to type on the keyboard. You can just say, do that same thing I've always had to do, but do it at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Okay, cool. I could care less.
I was very underwhelmed by tasks.
Yeah. I was like, I'm good. Like, that's fine. That's not AI, by the way. That's just called a cron job. They just basically tee it up and queue it for you. So that's not an innovation. So yeah, I think in terms of sellers adopting this, I think it will happen faster than we realize. I feel like I'm old enough I can now say this. There's a younger generation of sellers coming in that are more tech savvy and are following this stuff. They are interested in it. They want to use it. They are already playing with it. So I think, and I call this the exponential seller. I think we're going to, that's one of my bold predictions in 2025. I think we will start to see the emergence of a type of seller that leans on tech more than anyone ever in our space. And I don't just mean they're paying for this software and this software. No. I'm talking VAs are gone. They're not even, the way people look at hiring VAs versus hiring in person is the way people are going to view hiring digital assistants. So these AI agents versus VAs, they're going to say, why are you paying $12 an hour? This thing's $200 a month and I can have 20 of them overnight if I want. And they don't get sick. They don't have internet issues, all these different things. So I think the outsourcing world completely gets upended. And these younger sellers start to lean on these things. You kind of have this interesting split that occurs. What the models are capable of doing is something very different than what you can pay a software to do for you with those models. So I've talked about these AI agents, like a sourcing agent. Do I think we're going to have a software that comes out that says, hey, we built that for you. It's $2,000 a month, but we run it 24/7 and it's super profitable, blah, blah, blah. the probability of that existing is very low because we're such a niche market. But that does not mean that you couldn't build it yourself. So now we have this interesting split where the more tech savvy people, and I don't just mean coders, but just tech savvy people, are going to be able to do more than the non-tech savvy people, unless this comes out. So I think a lot of these things change. I think the executive assistant completely goes away. I don't think you're going to need an admin assistant in the Philippines anymore. You're just going to have an AI that's going to do it for you. Or you're going to have a cluster of AIs. You're going to have 5 that, one does scheduling, one does this, whatever. But I do think it is going to change a lot, but it becomes a massive superpower. I mean, consider this. The 2 biggest constraints in an Amazon business is capital and inventory. You have one or the other. Okay, well, let's say, let's focus on inventory. Well, why is inventory a bottleneck? Because you have to spend the time to purchase it. The reason why people go to wholesale from RA or OA is because it doesn't take any more effort to buy 4,000 units than it does 2,000 units in terms of time or effort, actually. So it's more scalable from that perspective. Now it's less scalable on the front end because it takes a lot more relationship building, got to open up the accounts, blah, 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 right? So there's a trade-off. Now imagine when you can have 10 PhD level, and you don't even need PhD levels, but whatever, AI agents, and they are scouring the internet for profitable things 24/7, costs you $2,000 a month. And every morning you wake up and there's a list of things you should purchase. It's been analyzed. It tells you how many you should purchase, tells you any potential downsides. You feed back data into it. So you send it your inventory lab reports every month and it goes, okay, cool. We actually don't do great on shoes. We're going to avoid shoes moving forward. Okay, great. So you steer it a little bit. That's where we're going. And then capital, that's its own thing. But I mean, heck, what's happening with crypto right now? If you solve that problem and you can purchase as much as you have, and you only have 10 grand, why wouldn't you go to 10 of your selling buddies and be like, hey, give me all your money. We're going to pull this together. And then we're going to start a new business, all of us together. Now we got 100 grand capital. Let's keep it going. Or let's go start a new crypto coin. We're going to raise it. We're going to do it right. So it's not a meme coin. We're going to raise a ton of money. Basically raise money the way historically you would have in like venture capital, but now you're doing it in crypto instead of equity. So a lot of things could happen. I'm not saying like that's going to happen, but like the world starts to shift pretty fast. So just imagine when we shift from a world of scarcity to abundance, even in this small area of the world.
This is fascinating because this is sort of already happening. Not a crypto coin or anything like that, but there are fund managers who are raising money, to do OA, to do RA, to do wholesale, because these fund managers are used to, oh man, it'd be really nice if we got a nice 4 to 5% return every single year.
And we're like, give me 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're like, I'm not taking less than 15% in a month. So, and you start getting that kind of institutional capital. And that problem becomes a heck of a lot easier because, I think the bottleneck, at least right now, and maybe this changes with AI agents, is how much of that capital can be deployed by one person or a small team, even someone who is really good,
Yeah. Right.
So
either way, to keep scaling, you have to hire people. You need more hands on the keyboard to do it.
Yeah. That's going to be fascinating.
So imagine when we have this process where you get the 10 sourcing agents, cost you $2,000 a month. You put, let's say you put 20 grand into the system. They're going to be able to adapt. So it's not this rigid, hard coded thing, right? Like if shoes start to suck, they stop sourcing shoes, whatever, right? Like it's this adaptive, non-rigid thing. And then, maybe you have another agent that's helping create shipments and all that stuff, because that shouldn't be that complicated compared to, and then when they get set live in Seller Central, Aura picks it up and just starts repricing the whole life cycle for you. Like imagine that world. Because all you really do, the critical points here is you buy inventory and you sell it. Like obviously there's a bunch of nuances and all the stuff inside that. But if we're just talking the two biggest levers here, like Aura is already handling the sales lever. I want to handle this lever. And if we can put these two things together, that's insane. That's absolutely insane.
We're essentially talking Skynet for Amazon sellers and probably scaring some people here. So the follow-up question is do supply chains ever become so efficient that us as middlemen are cut out?
It's a great question. I think, I'm a big Trekkie. If we extrapolate this out to infinity and we get replicators, yeah, obviously. But prior to replication, I think we're good for a while, to be honest, because there's still inefficiencies in the market. And unless I can teleport product, like physical products, it still has to get moved. So you still have that inefficiency there. I think what the AI agents help us do is unlock more of the inefficiencies that already exist. That's all sellers do. You unlock inefficiencies in the market. But what percentage of the inefficiencies can you claim? And what we're talking about now is taking that percentage and 100xing it in theory. And so I don't think so. I really don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of zero-sum mentality. People reach for the aspirin right now in this part of the episode.
Yeah.
So let's try to make them feel a little bit better, right? Am I being overly optimistic in thinking that the marketplaces themselves will cannibalize due to the efficiency, and there will still leave a role for people like us, the independent sellers, the sourcers, and
Yes.
kind of smaller suppliers?
There's still, because it's still a capital intensive business model, right? Like Amazon could have not brought on third-party sellers. They did that because they're like, the capital we have to spend on this is insane. So what they're trading with you is, we'll let you use our platform, but you take on the capital intensive aspect of buying the inventory. So the relationship there is mutually beneficial. They don't even have to worry about it, right? It's great. And also hear me, I'm eternally optimistic about this stuff. I think things will change, but please don't hear me say anything here and have a negative connotation about it. Change is scary. The world's always changing, always has been. Amazon's always evolving in some way, shape, or form. What I think about this stuff is, for the first time ever, this kind of cutting edge technology is not relegated to Fortune 500 companies. It is not relegated to academics at Stanford and MIT, where only they get access to this. This is getting built in the wild. That means you get access to this. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't have to be an enterprise level $1 million contract. You can pay $200 a month for this as an individual and have access to these kind of things. So the opportunity here is, you get to become a super powered human without having to pay a ridiculous amount of money or having access to this group, that group, whatever. It's democratized in that way. And so, like, why do you hire people in a business? Well, you hire them for intelligence. And in the best case, you're hiring them for specialized skill set in intelligence. Well, a lot of sellers don't do that. Why? Because it's expensive. I mean, it's going to cost you 6 figures to hire a truly highly intelligent individual in the States. And in a lot of businesses, even in ours, that still makes sense. And I'm going to keep doing it. But for a small business, like a seller, they're not doing that. Their only option is figure it out themselves or go hire a VA and hope they can figure it out. But that's not enough. And so what if you flip that on its head and said, well, okay, well, I know the questions to ask. Let me go hook up to this AI, to that AI, and have it help me. What if you had an agent that understood the details of your business better than you ever could, because it has all that context readily available, and you can ask the questions that burn in your mind that you struggle to answer with? How much faster could you grow? How much better of a business could you create having that level of access to intelligence without having to spend $100,000 for one node on that network, so to speak. So again, everything I'm saying here, I'm optimistic about it. I think it unlocks, I like to tell people, like, the way to think about AI right now is not this Terminator scary thing. That's what we're used to because that's what sold movies. Okay. Like, the world's not that cool. So the way to think about this is imagine the latent potential. So the unused potential in the average human. There are things that I would like to do, but it's just too far away from me, either in intelligence, skill set, understanding, what have you. Now imagine taking that potential and unlocking it for the average person, including yourself. How much better would things be? Could you now solve your most critical, painful problem that's keeping you up at night because you previously couldn't? And I think that's the world we're transitioning to, not this world of all jobs are gone. I think we're really unlocking more of ourselves. And it's $2,200 a month, whatever.
So
I do have the bigger question of, like, what happens when all the problems are new and there's no research base for the AI to access.
This is where level 4 comes in. So level 4 is innovators. So this is helpful, in my opinion, mainly for science and things like that nature, where there is no knowledge on it. How do we find a new subject and then just go and discover it and understand it and research it? That's that level 4, right? Where and I think level 4 is required for level 5, the organizations, because let's say you start a brand new company and you're like, we're going to do this in software. How do we do it? I don't know. Go figure it out. You need some innovation, right? Like, you don't just need a chatbot. You need something that can go and do work. So that's agents, and 2, make smart decisions and experiment. And that's innovators. And then you're able to have actual organizations that can do this whole thing. So what's interesting is a lot of people assume AI is not creative. It's actually not true. If you go look at some of the benchmarks, it's actually incredibly creative. It comes down to prompt engineering at this point. Asking the right questions, giving the right kind of context, things of that nature. But you can actually be like, hey, act like you're just a super curious 5-year-old on this one subject. What questions would you have? And you'll be surprised at what comes up. And you're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. That's kind of cool, right? So you can kind of have it ping pong back and forth with different perspectives. How would a PhD person, how would an academic person ask questions about the subject? Or how would my 10-year-old do that? And all of a sudden you're getting different perspectives. And then that's helping you shift your perspective to see things differently. So I don't think we'll ever run out of problems, but also we might say as a society that those big things are for humans. Great. Totally fine. I don't think it'll be WALL-E where we're all just sitting on couches. I really don't think that.
They looked really comfortable. I don't know if
they did.
But all right. So back to like the advancement of in the Amazon perspectives.
Yeah.
And tell me if you disagree with this. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the most vulnerable in the current innovation phase that we're in would be those analog discount stores, right? Like, they'll go before the third-party Amazon seller if the seller learns how to access that, and the whole marketplace, or the actual inventory acquisition becomes more efficient, right?
Yeah, I don't know if in-person retailers go away. A lot of retailers are shifting to what's called experiential retailing. So like Bonobos is a good one. If you go into Bonobos in like a city like Boston, they have, thank you. They have product and you can try it on, but you don't leave there with product. They ship it to you. And the whole concept is like, hey, we're not here to sell you. We're here to help you figure out what you need. We do the sell, and then like it's shipped to your house in 2 days. So I think we go away from and Amazon's already done this, right? Like, if I just know what I want, I just go to Amazon and buy it. Like, I'm not going to go to Walmart in person or whatever. But there are times when I just want to go scroll. I want to go experience, and I want to go discover things. Now, can AI help with that? Yeah, it can. If I'm like, hey, like, I like this kind of style of things, go find me 30 things that are similar that I don't already have. Sure. But, I don't like buying clothes online because I'm 5'9" and nothing fits perfect. So like I have to go in person. But once I know in person, then I'm like, cool, I'll order it online. So I think there is still that discoverability experience standpoint that does occur. But, we're talking like broad strokes here. There's going to be, to use, Chris's term, Luddites that are just like, I don't want to do that. Like I have people that don't want to buy things on Amazon. They're like, I just don't enjoy that. That's fine. So, it's hard to say that it's going to be black and white. I think it's going to be shades of gray.
Right. Speaking of Luddites, what somebody who would consider themselves a Luddite, what's the easiest way for a seller to start implementing AI and kind of catch this wave, so to speak?
Yeah. There's a lot of things that are getting created that are not really practical yet. There are versions of browser agents that break all the time. They're really slow. Like you got to watch it the whole time. So it doesn't really like save your time. The best starting place, in my opinion, is Perplexity. Why? Because you're constantly asking questions and trying to solve them. And if you're jumping into Google and typing in your question and then clicking through a bunch of things to find the answer, that takes forever. If you do it in Perplexity, it will do that search for you, come back, give you the answer directly, and then tell you where it found it. So you can go and check the source. That alone helps you just be like, I have a quick question, or like, I don't know anything about inventory management. Great. Go to Perplexity and say, hey, what are the best practices for inventory management? What are the 3 top books that are recommended that I read that are practical? Get your answer. That's good. And then, having some fun, right? Like do some crazy stuff. Go into ChatGPT, export all your inventory lab data as CSV, upload it to 4.0, ask it to find some interesting trends. And then maybe that tells you something. Maybe it doesn't. We're not yet at a point where I can say, go get this AI. It will solve this big thing for you consistently. We're at a point right now where there's a bunch of people using AI, like OpenAI, Anthropic, and building software on top of that solves one thing. So like Howie.ai just does scheduling via email. That's it. I use it. It's great. There's one called Granola for meetings. So I have a lot of Zoom meetings. It doesn't join in the meeting like Fireflies does. It just sits in the background and consumes the audio and transcribes it. So I could take meeting notes. It'll enhance the meeting notes for me. And like I have yet to pay for it. It's been free. So start to just play with different tools and see what works, see what doesn't work. But fundamentally, I think AI needs to solve a problem for it to be practical for the average person. And it's not, again, at a point where it's solving large problems, like I got a section 3, but it is solving problems like I have a question and I don't know the answer and I don't know where to go.
So yeah, Perplexity, compare the next question you have. Like if you compare searching your answer in Google versus searching for it on Perplexity, and you will know why Google has finally dropped below 90% market share for the first time in God knows how long.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But do be mindful if you're searching for agents or anything like that, like just keep in mind, like the models themselves, we have not reached level 3. It's people building automations on top of that. And again, some of these are amazing. I'm a big fan of Lindy.ai for building these automations. But again, I call them automations more so than agents. But just play around, it's a good thing to say, I have this one little area that I struggle with. Throw it into Perplexity and say, hey, find me an AI software that helps with this kind of thing, and give it a ton of context. Describe the problem in detail, and maybe it gives you a solution. Maybe it doesn't. I like using it as a brainstorming thing too. So like I'll have ideas for like a blog post, and I have like my version of it, but I'm neurodivergent. So it's not like perfectly clear. So I'll brain dump it and be like, okay, tell me exactly what I'm actually trying to say here. And it'll come back and say, here's exactly what you're doing. It's like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. So I like to tell people AI can really help you avoid the blank page problem. So if you're trying to create stuff, if you're just staring at a blank screen, that's really hard to overcome. That's too much friction. So you can say, okay, this is roughly what I want to do. And even if it only gets to 20% of the way there, it's still progress that you can now say, okay, cool. Now I have a place to start. Let's start to, iterate and move. So that's going to help a ton as well.
I'm going to ask a question since all of us have kids here, away from the Amazon space, away from anything like that.
Yeah.
In an age of AI, when I often catch my son, using ChatGPT, using Perplexity, trying to download new AI apps to do all of his homework for him.
This is why I knew I liked your kid.
Right. Which I'm like, listen, I am absolutely okay with this. I'm like, number one, you got to make sure that when you have to start writing essays and things like that,
Yep.
You got to make sure that it's going to pass any AI detection. I said, or you're going to fail. I said, but number two,
I got a tool for that.
Right. I said, but number two, we don't want to allow this AI to replace our critical thinking skills and our ability to learn.
Yeah.
How do we, because of course we cannot, be there to watch our kids every second of every day, but how do we overcome that issue? Because maybe it's just my kid, but what I've seen is that kids are inherently lazy. And that it's not just physically, but also mentally. This is an easy path. I can go play video games instead. So how do we push them to overcome that?
This is a human problem, right? If you look, I'm a finance major. My favorite class was behavioral finance. Relatively new subject matter, but Daniel Kahneman, a lot of people will know of this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, right? You got system 1, system 2. System 2 sucks. Why? Because it takes a lot more energy. Nobody wants to do that. That's real critical thinking, first principle. System 1 is like analogies. We can move fast, right? But not really that accurate. So honestly, I think this is like a human problem. Now, in terms of the kids, I have a 8-year-old stepson. He does not have access to devices outside of like TV, right? And even that's kind of, somewhat restricted. I have given him access. See, I'll pull it out here. I backed the Rabbit R1 device, which was kind of cool. So this guy right here. So you can ask it questions and stuff like that. I've let him play with that. And I kind of just let him do it, just see what he would ask. And he was asking math questions, which was kind of cool. It's a big math guy. I think the way to position these things to younger people is not about what it can do for you, but what it can teach you. I think that's the place to go to. It's less about do this thing for me. And it's more, can you teach me how to do this better? Or like, hey, I'm struggling with this, like using it kind of like that co-pilot kind of mindset. Right. But at the same time, it's kind of funny, right? When I was in school, all of our teachers were like, you're not going to have a calculator in real life when you're at the bank. And now I have an iPhone. You know what I mean? Like, so part of me is kind of like, I don't know the right answer here because we're in this big unknown. So I'm trying to go back to my experience and history of like, well, if I didn't learn how to use a calculator, that would have sucked now. So I'm grateful I did. But at the same time, I'm grateful that I learned how to do it by hand too. But then again, it's like, when do I ever do math by hand? I don't. So in technology, you have this thing called layers of abstraction. So computers use binary, zeros and ones. Well, to write code in zeros and ones would take, like, if we did Aura in binary, we would still be writing it right now. Like, no. So what you do is you then say, okay, well, let's write a language that's easier for humans that converts to this. So now humans don't do binary. So we have assembly. And then we say, okay, well, assembly is kind of tough. Let's go up and up and up. And so, now we have languages like Python, which when you read it is more like human language than computer language, right? Like it's literally saying, do this thing, right? And I do think of large language models as like the next layer of abstraction where we're actually using natural language. So part of me is, I'm kind of 50-50 on this, right? Like I don't want it to be used in a way that, like, good example here. If I say, here's a math test and I gave him a calculator, said, just use a calculator to solve it. He didn't learn anything. But I still want him to know how to use the calculator for when we just need to move fast, right? So I guess I'm still also trying to find that balance of, it is a tool that can both just tell you the answer or it could help you learn the answer. Both are options. And it's just figuring out maybe the things that he's super interested in and saying, hey, let's sit down and learn about that thing using AI. And then that kind of maybe is an unlock. I saw something where a young girl was real into Minecraft and then used ChatGPT to help her to like design this cool map or whatever. Like that's kind of cool, right? Because now it's this assistive thing versus this like I just did it for you, you know. So maybe that's more so the approach, or like, I mean, think about this. Like when you're a kid, you're curious about everything. I mean, when I was that young, the internet wasn't in existence, so like, or at least I didn't have access to it at home. So I couldn't just be like, oh, I want to learn about birds today. Like, dude, I got to go to the library. I'm not going to the library and like read through all these books. It'll take weeks. But now I could have this random idea and be like, let me just go search it on Perplexity. Or this guy on Twitter wanted to build a fusion reactor, a small one, in his home. He's never done it before. That's not his skill set, not his education. He used Claude projects and created one. What? Come on. So like that's that latent potential, right? This guy could have easily just been like searching on Google, couldn't find the right answers, couldn't find the right resources, and gave up. But now he built it and he's proud of that, and he should be. So I do wonder if we can position it to kids as this is a way to learn fast. Ask any question you have. It's gonna have infinite patience with you, and ideally it will learn more about you over time to be able to give you better answers and help you understand things faster. You know, it's a tool at the end of the day, right? That's all it is. We can talk about sentience and all this crazy nonsense that we're clearly not there yet. At the end of the day, it's just a tool, and it's a tool to help us, I think, at least in my mind, become better versions of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That was a real long-winded answer because I have not yet thought about that seriously, but
it's
a tough one
lately.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the one thing I think is true is the best answers from AI come in the follow-up questions. Mm-hmm. So I do want to install some sort of rule where, you know, if my kids are using AI, they're almost like, I almost want to require them to ask a follow-up question, because that's where the good stuff, you know, like just at least figure out why, you know, don't just say, hey, what is this, the answer to this
deeper
problem, and you take the answer and you walk away, you know, if you force a follow-up question. But I think
now,
you know, part of being the older generation with kids having access to this, there is something to be said about the older generation getting out of their way, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of, you know, and I'm talking to the crowd that if you share the Facebook post that says, back in my day, I you know, I rode my bike at dawn and didn't come back until sunset when dinner was ready. Get out of the kids' way. You know, like, this isn't your time anymore. You know, just you know, but there's something to be said about us not knowing what the best is going to be. You know, like we can have these just archaic rules and be like, oh, you know, you need to go outside for X number of hours a day. You know, it's we kind of have to adapt as well, you know?
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important for everybody to play with it. Like, you know, my grandparents are in their 80s and I show them this stuff because I just want them to, because they have fears of what they see on the media of like, oh, AI is just going to ruin everything. I'm like, hey, let me show you what AI can do right now and how cool it is. And they're like, oh, that's amazing. And I'm like, okay, so we just went from it's going to burn down the world to this is really cool. Can you show me how to do it on my phone? Like in 5 minutes, you know, it's like people just need to know and understand it. But if maybe a hack that just came to mind, Chris, in the custom instructions, if you create an account for him, in the custom instructions, tell it explicitly not to give him the answers, but to have him reason with it to get the answers together. I wonder if that would work.
That's a good question. I'll have to do that. I may have to switch to a plan where I can get sub users instead of being cheap.
Right. No, I don't blame you.
We're going to go way off the path here, but I'll tell you, one of the most fun, or I guess useful uses of AI for me is I've had it walk me through step by step, like how to create world-class dishes. I made Coco Vaughn, you know, not too long ago.
Dude, no way.
I don't even think I could have pronounced that, you know, a couple of weeks ago, but it told me how to say it and then actually how to make it. And it was pretty daggone good.
I thought she was an actress or something.
Right.
And imagine using the voice mode, the advanced voice mode, and while you're cooking, be like, all right, what's next? And it's like, all right, do this. Hey, did you do that? Or hey, this thing's kind of starting to burn. What do I do? I'll do this. Like, like again, this is that latent potential. Like prior to this, you might not have ever like taken the time because the friction was too high of figuring out how to do this.
I have to read like a backstory on some recipe blog about, 32 generations of, I can't.
Yeah. Or, you want a certain style, I was writing a video script and I was like, I really like this. I was like, I wonder what this would be like if Steve Jobs did it. Cause I want to tell more of a story here. And I struggle with that. And it came back and it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty on point. And I was like, I'm using that now. Like, I'm going to make some tweaks here, but I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I can get the idea out, but I struggle with those details and the nuances of writing, but now it can help me be better than I previously could. And just imagine when we get to a point where we have infinite memory, infinite context, and it understands you. And now the recommendations are really tailored to you, tailored to the business. It doesn't matter. That's when I think life gets really fun at that point. Cause then it's like, what do you want to do? We'll figure it out together. You're never alone. I mean, it's absolutely dumbfounding.
Yeah.
And think about this too, by the way, and I'll stop at this point. Homeless people are able to get phones. ChatGPT has a free version. Think about that. Think about how accessible this technology is. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. What is one or two things that you've read or listened to in the past 30 days that have been helpful or impactful to you?
It's a Paul Graham essay called Founder Mode. It's basically talking about Brian Chesky, founder of Airbnb. I have a thing where I sometimes get too high level, right? Trying to build a business, and that's not always the best thing to do. And so that blog post, I think, really helped me shift and be like, no, get back into the details, like get back into it. Like, we're always told like, oh, hire this and delegate that and like get out of the way. And like, while a lot of that is true, I think we're viewing it black and white. And that blog post really helped me, I think, see the nuances and see how maybe that's actually not the right recommendation or advice that business owners should be getting. You should be in the details. You should care about everything. And like, while I've always cared about all the details, I've tried to, organize in a certain type of way. And, after reading that, getting back into the details, I'm finding all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, oh, like this is the value here, right? Like in the details, like the things you just would not see otherwise. So that's been absolutely fantastic.
Perfect. Where should people go to follow you or learn more about Aura?
Yeah, Aura, go aura.com. So GOAURA.com. We'd love to have you come on board and test out this new workflow feature. We're getting great feedback on it, which I'm very excited for. And then for me personally, I'm mainly active on X. It's at Dillon, DILLON _Carter. That's pretty much where I'm mostly active. But yeah, if you're not using Aura, come try us out. 2025 is going to be insane.
Perfect. Now I want to add a little caveat to that. I know a lot of people are probably like, oh, well, they've got AI repricing, they've got these workflows, et cetera, and so on. That's going to be out of my price range because I'm a new seller. But you guys have a $27 a month plan that includes all of this stuff, includes the AI, includes, workflows, everything, if you are doing under 10,000 a month. So
that's correct.
I'll make sure to pop that in the chat below, in the video description below, so anybody can give it a try. And I'll, of course, your link to Twitter. I can't call it X yet. I'm trying. We always like to end the show with a quote of the week, and I thought this one was interesting. It's from Christian Lou Lange. It's technology is a useful servant, but a dangerous master. And this quote is not meant to make people fearful, but just to highlight that using things like automation and AI should be, and repricing should be helpful in your business. But you don't understand the underlying principles of your business, how to properly implement these tools, they are going to become more of a hindrance than they are a help. And I think we covered that quite a bit today. So
yeah.
Dylan, you always make me feel like a troglodyte in the best way, showing me fire for the first time when we have a conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show, man.
No, I appreciate you guys and the hype. I have learned how much I struggle with and still do not understand. So I appreciate it, but I am very much in the trenches trying to figure out life myself. But I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That's the pod, everybody. We'll see you in the next show. Thanks for listening to Clear the Shelf with Chris and Chris. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot on your phone and share to Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite FBA group, and be sure to tag me and let me know why you liked it and what you'd like to hear more from us in the future. Also, I'd like to give you some free gifts for listening. Head over to rabbittrailchallenge.com and repricerchallenge.com for some free courses to further your business. Thanks for listening.